Lawyers of Reddit, what's the worst way you've seen a person screw over someone else in court, whether it be criminal, civil, or divorce proceedings?
Not the worst, but one that sticks out that they did to themselves. Woman shows up to court in a "It's party time bitches" drink up t-shirt. She was there for her first appearance on a third DUI charge. Judge was not in a humorous mood that day.
This thread is making me feel smarter by the second.
Got selected for the jury for a DUI case. So the next day, while they were still selecting, I showed up intentionally in a patron shirt. Got dismissed.
Nasty custody fight. The ex-wife was a lawyer and represented herself. The ex-husband had a pretty shitty lawyer. She kept howling things back to court trying to get more benefits from him, and his lawyer just let it keep happening, and it was destroying his life. Allegations of child abuse, was taking so much money that he could barely afford an apartment and couldn't afford a car, which both figured in later for custody. Finally, the ex-wife's father, also a lawyer, asked to meet with the judge and mentioned a few things that he knew were going on. One of the children was manic depressive, and the ex-wife would take him off his meds before it was the ex-husband's turn for custody. The child abuse allegations were from the ex-husband trying to restrain the child during a manic episode because he wasn't medicated. The ex-wife had intentionally timed the child abuse allegation to fall just before the holidays so the ex-husband couldn't see the kids for Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. She bragged to family that it would do the maximum emotional damage possible doing it then. The ex-wife had forged documents to overstate the ex-husband's income when alimony was being determined. Oh. And the ex-wife was sleeping with the ex-husband's lawyer. The ex-husband's lawyer was reported to the bar, not sure what happened there. The judge ordered a review of everything and arranged for a new lawyer for the ex-husband. It was looking like the alimony would be vastly reduced and the ex-husband was going to get custody. But then the ex-husband died, blood clot, 2 months later. Years of being screwed over, finally saw a light at the end of the tunnel, but ended up being the wrong light at the end of the wrong tunnel.
This all was horrible, but that last bullet point was just the cherry on top.
The worst part is, you know, the woman is smiling at how she got away with everything and that he's dead now.
Not my case, but still my favorite story. Dude screwed himself over when he went to jury trial for a burglary charge and wore the same distinct sweatshirt he wore the night he committed the crime. Kind of hard to argue the guy in the video isn't your client at that point. Needless to say, he was convicted and spent a few years in dock.
Turns on video. Man yelling on camera, "Look at me. Me, David Garvin, stealing TVs. Who'd believe it? David Garvin? That is not me."
Man, it sucks when you only have one good sweatshirt.
More of a case of screwing himself over, but here goes. This was a case another prosecutor in my office had a few years back. 30-year-old defendant was charged with sexual assault of a child after he got his girlfriend's 14-year-old sister pregnant. She actually kept the baby, so the police just waited and got a paternity test. No surprise, defendant was the father. Defendant wanted probation. Prosecutor refused to offer it. He decided to plead guilty and have a jury trial and punishment. Here in Texas, you can choose to have the jury set punishment. Evidence mostly proceeded as expected. The victim testified to having consensual, aside from not being old enough to consent, sex with the defendant, getting pregnant, etc. Paternity test introduced. Defendant took the stand. His version of events was that he snuck into victim's room at night, covered her mouth, and held her down while he forcibly had sex with her against her will. It seemed like his own lawyer had no idea that's the story he settled on. The jury deliberated about 15 minutes before returning a verdict of 17 years, the maximum possible as charged was 20. When interviewed by the attorneys afterwards, one of them said they decided on 17 years so the defendant would never forget the age of consent in Texas again.
He chose to have a jury, a Texas jury, decide his sentencing after he got a 14-year-old girl pregnant. What an idiot.
There's a lawyer in my town who has a reputation for being a real He left a very successful firm to go off on his own. He and the firm negotiated which clients he would take, and how eventual fees from those clients would be divided. All seemed fine and dandy. As soon as he's out the door, he sues his old firm saying the deal is unenforceable and that he should 100% of the fees from the clients who came with him. He lost, and appealed, lost again and appealed to the state Supreme Court, where they shut his ass down and, in extremely diplomatic language, pretty much called him a
Sounds to me like justice was served.
I never get people who burn bridges for short-term gain. I see it all the time at work. Like, someone gets a job in a new department and decides to say everything they've ever wanted to their old boss. But then a couple months later they realize it's difficult to do their new job when they've torched their own reputation and turned department heads against you just because you wanted some pretty revenge.
Not a lawyer, but when my Phil and Mel got divorced, she wanted to file jointly for the previous year because they were still married. They would have gotten a decent refund. He insisted on filing separately, despite the fact that he would owe $4,000, because he wanted her to also owe the IRS. He did it to frost her ass.
Spite is so seductive.
I was in the tax field for years, and I cannot stress enough how spiteful and mean ex-spouses' ex-partners can be. Especially when it comes to money and tax credits deductions.
My dad bought everything for my brothers he had custody of, but told me I didn't get anything because my mom needed to support me. It was so bad he gave me Nintendo game for Christmas, but said it had to stay at his house, which effectively meant it belonged to my brothers. They always fought over custody, child support, and claiming dependents. They would try to bribe siblings to switch houses. He eventually ended up owing her child support, which he didn't want to pay. I finally lucked out as he bought me a couple of $1,000 in clothes and such, but made sure I always gave him a receipt. My mom freaked out and was furious with me when he turned in all these receipts to fulfill the delinquent child support. She wanted that money. I never felt guilty for it. Her idea of teaching me life lessons was I needed to support myself at 16, since she paid the rent, and if I couldn't afford to go to school dances and such, it was a lesson that you can't always have what you want and life isn't fair and you'll appreciate it more if you earn it yourself.
Sitting waiting for my client and the judge is giving a mass colloquy for an alternative program on a DUI. Basically probation. Question: has anyone consumed alcohol or taken drugs in the last 24 hours? Obvious answer aside, one dude proudly raises his hand. I smoked some dope last night. He did not get probation.
This guy sounds like Jason on The Good Place.
Got to admire his honesty, I guess.
One time, I saw an indigent defendant who was in custody tell the judge his public defender wasn't working hard enough, and he wanted the judge to appoint different counsel. The judge asked him what specifically was the problem, and he said, "I don't want a female lawyer. I need a man who can take charge and fight for me," or something very similar to that. The judge, also female, said that's not how it works. Then she started yelling and getting into specifics about his public defender, just mainly "I don't like her, she won't visit me," etc. The judge is annoyed and looks at him and is like, "Fine, I'll appoint another attorney for you, but because you are not satisfied with your attorney and I need time to appoint you new counsel, I am not going to hear any other issues today and will reset your case." A few days later, the judge sends defendant notice of his new appointed attorney, who happens to also be female, and notice of the case reset for 6 weeks. The case was originally set for a bond hearing, and the DA and his PD had agreed to release him on an unsecured bond, meaning he would have gotten out the day if he hadn't thrown his temper tantrum. Instead, he waited another 6 weeks in jail just to have another female attorney represent.
Makes me think of Sneaky Pete, where the guy gets himself thrown in jail by attempting to hold up a gun store to avoid being killed. Maybe the defendant wanted to be in jail.
I don't think that was the case, but I worked as a public defender for 6 years, and definitely had a handful of clients that were okay with being in jail. The streets aren't easy, and I worked in a mountain town, so the winters could be worse. The saddest case I can think of like that is a client who spent 18 months in before his case was dismissed. He got out with no family, no money. He lost essentially everything he had while in jail. He had lost 60 pounds while incarcerated. He was in his early 60s and died from hypothermia a few months after his release, sleeping in an alley. He weighed 90 pounds when he died and had $5 in his pocket.
Prosecutor here. I showed up for a bond hearing one morning and the defendant asked the judge if he could say something. The first words out of his mouth were, "Hey judge, look, the reason I hit her was because she disrespected me." He did not prevail.
I once went to traffic court for various tickets, insurance tags, etc. I was not a responsible automobile owner back then. Anyway, on the advice of a friend, I hired an attorney who specialized in traffic court. Best decision. I get called up in front of the judge, and I want to tell him some extenuating information, so I start on my story and the judge just interrupts me and goes, "Hold on. Did you hire this guy?" Points to my lawyer. "Yes, Your Honor." "Then please shut up and let him do his job." The judge, my lawyer and the prosecutor all know each other on a first-name basis, they all work in traffic court, and my lawyer gets me a good deal where I pay a minimal fine and have to reinstate my license and insurance by a certain date, and the judge is like, "Thanks, next."
Ooh, yes. I can't tell you how many people shoot themselves in the foot by trying to explain their situation, when the judge and state genuinely would rather give you the benefit of the doubt and give you a chance to fix things and move on. So many cases where I was like, "Welp, we were going to do probation, but this guy probably just needs to sit in jail," or similar laugh out loud.
The best results I ever got in traffic court were when the only 3 words I said the entire time were, "Yes, Your Honor." When he called me up, and again when he asked of his decision to drop the no insurance ticket. I didn't have the current card when I got pulled over, drop the severity of the speeding ticket, and to give me a deferment on it was acceptable. He started talking and it seemed to be going well, so I figured just shutting up was my best course of action.
When things are sweet, when things are swell, when things are going really well, I do not speak. I do not smile. I shut my f***ing mouth a while,